Whether they call themselves Chicano, Latino, or Hispanic, have recently arrived, or have family histories that date back over 100 years, Latinos continue to be a growing influence in Utah, by far the largest ethnic minority community in the state. As these short oral histories illustrate, the lives and experiences of Utah Latinos are woven throughout the fabric of our state. William Bill Gonzalez's father, Prudencio, was born in New Mexico near Taos, along the Rio Grande. He and his wife Carolina arrived in Utah via Colorado in 1895. Bill was born in 1935.
I was born in one of the most isolated towns in the nation, Monticello, Utah. But they came to Utah because land was free with the Homestead Act. They came into Colorado, from Colorado to Utah. And they declared land, which is now a newspaper rock. It's a national monument. That was my dad's. I always say, look, my dad's name is up on top there. That was his homestead. He was a cowboy for 60 years in that area. Cowboy and a sheep herder. Just unbelievable what that guy could do with a rope. And gallop, the horse racing and that there. I don't know, one of the worst things we could possibly do as kids is fall asleep on the horse. Because if we fell off, we'd end up crying, but then he'd get the belt. Cowboys don't sleep on horses. We're a mixture, we're mestizos, we're Indians. And so I'm not Spanish American, I'm not Mexican American. I say I'm Chicano because that brings the whole thing in together here. I'm born in this country, North American, and with the whole culture, Hispanic, Mexican culture. There were a lot of us in family. I was about the 8th one. And we knew that a certain time of the year, they'd say, okay, you're going to school. And you walk into those classrooms, you know, they're speaking English. You knew some of the words. Everything was, it was a totally different world. My dad was very severe on our studying. He made us study. We had to study, we had to go to school. But we got some very good exemplary teachers. And in fact, what the principal, great principal, and you know, he's the one that says, Bill, you're going to school, you're going to college. I said, me? Later on, I did go to college. And one of the reasons is I continued, even though I got so difficult, we were so poor, I washed dishes for 3 years, all the way to get the BA. I was very much into English literature. But I needed some extra credits, and I thought, well, someone says, you know, there's a class in Spanish, there's Spaniards teaching. And why don't you go? I said, well, we speak some Spanish. Well, he said, go find out if it's Spanish or not. So I went in my 16th century Spanish, it's Monticello Spanish, 16th century, I talked to this Spaniard. He couldn't believe it. I was trying to talk Spanish and he gave a lecture in class on Hispanic culture. I said, and I was going to give this up. Nope. I went back and changed my major and started studying Spanish more and reliving it, just rediscovering it.
Bill graduated from college, and with the benefit of the GI Bill for military service and a scholarship, he studied and taught in Spain for 10 years.
All of a sudden I began to see what strikes were, what student strikes were, how students could complain. If they were organized, they could be very effective. So then I came back to the States. All of a sudden I discovered that it was just as bad here as it had been in Spain. It's the exclusion, the segregation, going to the schools and seeing the little Mexican kids put in a corner, being ignored. And then I came up to the university. It was the same up here. I think I was one of the few that was, I think one Hispanic had graduated from the University of Utah. This was 1972 when I came up. And that was it. There were no professors, nothing. I said, but this is a university, so I got together with my sister and we said, we have to do something about this. There was an organization that was beginning, it was called Socio. And there were some people who were very, very cooperative. G.H. Bell was one of the top ones. He says, Bill, you want an administrator? You're going to get it. We're going to get in this Granite School District. It began to open up, but we had to go before all of the boards of education. The university was very good, very flexible then. It provided an umbrella for us where we could work up here and, affect the rest of the state.
Rafael and Dolores Rivera Lola Torres came to the U.S. from Mexico in the early 1900s. He came to work in the sugar beet fields. She fled the Mexican Revolution with members of the Mexican Mormon colonies. They met in Utah and together raised a family, built the El Charro and El Farol restaurants, and were among the founding members of the first Spanish-speaking ward of the LDS Church. Their children, Ruth and Elias Torres, talk about growing up with extended family in Salt Lake City.
There were about 3 families from Mexico, either Mexico or New Mexico. And they were all members of the church at that time. But they didn't have any place to go. And so they started meeting together, and they got permission from the church offices to start having a meeting there. Kind of a family meeting is the way it started. So basically, we spoke Spanish at home. And this is true with all the families.
But my father also said when we were in high school that we had to take Spanish because he said we had to learn how to read it and write it correctly. He felt that he was lacking in that.
He had set up a small business already, and he felt that it would be good to set up a Mexican restaurant. So they found a location there on 2nd South and Edison Street. So they opened it up. My mother had learned a lot of the recipes in Mexico. So she started using those and started showing my father how to do things, what recipes to use. So that's where they got started with the recipes. Whenever we were celebrating, like the Cinco de Mayo or 16 de Septiembre, the whole Spanish community would get together and have a program and then a dance. As I remember, Ruth had already started her college work, and I think we were the only Mexicans in school. After I returned from the service, they had the GI Bill, and I talked to a lot of the other Mexican fellows about going to school, and their attitude was, why go to school if when all is said and done, people aren't going to pay attention to that because we're Mexicans. And my attitude was that I wasn't going to worry about that.
The first place I taught in Salt Lake when I graduated was up in Ogden. And I rode the Bamberger. I didn't have a car, but I rode the Bamberger. And then I taught up in Bingham when there was still a Bingham, and up in the canyon. And there were all kinds of languages up there.
Born in Panama in 1933, Javier Sáenz attended college in South Dakota before arriving in Utah in 1956 to complete graduate studies. He describes his work with the Latino community at that time.
I worked for mental health for 32 years as providing direct services and finally as an administrator of a program that was serving Hispanics almost exclusively. I gather about 25 trainees, Hispanics mostly, and train them from A to Z in mental health to provide services. And we wrote the first set of principles of what is a cultural competency. Cultural competency is essentially to have programs who are client-driven. And we had about 600 people who went through that program. It was in conjunction with the university. They got up to 90 credit hours, and most of them had continued from there. Many has masters now, master's degree. Later on, when we no longer have money to pay for tuition here, we went to the community college. And the community college had no behavioral sciences. So our curriculum became the core of their behavioral science department. So in that way, then went on to help other people as well.
Robert Archie Archuleta was born in 1930 in Grand Junction, Colorado. His parents, Agapito and Florencia, had left New Mexico to find work on the railroad. His father worked on a dairy farm until the Depression hit and the family moved to Oregon. They finally settled in Pocatello, Idaho, where Archie finished school and went on to graduate from college.
It was a very small community, but we all knew each other. And when we got there, it was the beginning of the war, the Second World War. And so many of the kids that were older than I, just anywhere from 3 to 5 to 10 years older, had gone into the service. So there was a lot of patriotic fervor. All of us were involved in this saving steel and iron and rubber and all that for the war effort. The culture was a very important part of our life. In Pocatello, very young, I was brought on with some of the adults to put on 16th of September and 5th of May celebrations, in which we sang and brought dancers on board and made speeches and all that sort of thing, because that was very important. The other things that were very important were the whole question of Christmas with Las Posadas and New Year's with the tamaladas. And those were great times, trying to see how many tamales you could eat before you burst. The motivation for going on to college arose from a couple of factors. Number one, in my mother's family that lived in Colorado, several of them were going on to college. And that was kind of a motivation for my parents. I myself wasn't too interested in it, but since I got hurt, it looked like I wasn't going to be able to get on the railroad. So my dad kept pushing me to go to college, and I did. I came to Utah in 1953 to start teaching. I believe I was the first Latino teacher in the Salt Lake City School District. There was a sense of not belonging as Latino students came on board. And one of the things that they did very quickly was they gravitated toward me in the school simply because I was one of them. My formative years were formed as a Mexican-American. But during my older years, as I was developing as an adult, the Chicano movement took place. And so I consider myself a Chicano. One of the first groups that we formed, that actually formed in Ogden first and then came to Salt Lake, and then throughout the state, was the American GI Forum. And that began quickly to explore the whole question of civil rights for Latinos. It was at this time, shortly in the late 60s then, that, and you know, by then the Chicano movement was really in full force, that Socio came into being. And Socio really was the spark plug for advocacy for Latinos in the state. And of course, that was really instrumental in opening more positions for Latino teachers in the school districts throughout the state, and it began the first push for Latino administrators. And it opened up the university itself. There were very few Latino students and very few professors. I guess the reason I'm considered part of the movement is because I'm older, and I was there in the beginning, more or less. I think that some of the accomplishments, first of all, I was, without bragging, a good teacher. And that sold me to the parents and the kids. The second thing is I became an administrator. I began to work on a variety of different societal as well as educational problems. And so I became known that way. And the very fact that I was so active, without my realizing this, allowed people to become active as well. As long as they felt that someone was in there that was active, that maybe had a place in the community, it made it easier for others to follow and to join.